So we're here today to discuss the Sierra Point Open Space and Parks Master Plan. As you'll see, we are in the second phase of a three-phase process. This presentation will discuss these agenda items, starting with a brief introduction, which this is most of it. Talk about existing conditions, common design elements that are consistent with each plan alternative, and then the three schemes that I'll walk through, and then finally just a comparison of those three schemes. And it's important to note these are for conversation, and they are describing an identity and character and quality of experience that we have developed out of the phase one discovery work, where there was conversation with many residents of the city, as well as the subcommittee that we've been working with. As I said, we're in a three-phase process. We wrapped up discovery phase, which was really about outreach, analysis, and assessment of the site conditions. We are now in the exploration, at the beginning of which we developed these three alternatives based on the discovery phase information. And as you can see from all of these red dots and green dots, these are all points of engagement that will take us to better understanding of where to take the master plan into the task 3 resolution phase, where a final vision for the open space is prepared. As we mentioned, there are numerous points of engagement. We are in February now, and in fact, this bubble is our presentation today. We do have a series of other points of check-in, including the Sierra Point Yacht Club, farmers market, and on-site pop-up, as well as a potential business owners meeting in the Sierra Point area. The site, in terms of study, began with us as comprehensively looking at the relationship of this open space to what is in downtown and how it connects to San Bruno Mountain, how it is related to the marina, obviously, and how it's related to other private parcels that offer open space benefits and amenities on the area. But this red line is the focus of the schemes that you'll see today. And this is all publicly owned property. Existing conditions are probably familiar to you, certainly to people that go down to the yacht club. North is up, essentially. The white line shows the boundary of the study area. And you can see that the open space and parcels that are publicly owned are dominated by parking, with the parcel R, where originally, I think in the master plan days, a restaurant was to land. As you know, the Bay Trail wraps around and becomes the point of access and connection for the marina. It's also worth noting that there's a future retail proposed in the existing parking garage that anchors the ground floor right at its connection to the public open space that we see as a benefit. Additionally, there are plans for a hotel on the parcel to the north that will also have open space connection. And there'll be ideally co-benefits between the hotel operation and the public open space. Again, it's worth noting how much open parking, although on private property, there is, including this garage that I mentioned as the retail component. This is a topographic map of the existing conditions, and we bring it up to note a couple things to keep in mind as we talk about the plans. One, it identifies where there are existing bathroom facilities, the yacht club, the harbor master's building, the marina work yard, and a trash enclosure, significant trash enclosure upland. The existing Bay Trail and the promenade that connects to all of the docks, it's about an elevation of 9. King tide storm events, as we'll see in some diagrams, currently come up to about that elevation. The reason I bring this up is because much of our work is considering sea level rise and the projections for that and the implications on the site. The other thing to note, as you well know, is that Sierra Point is a landfill. It's made out of garbage, rubble, and refuse, bound by a riprap perimeter. The green line along this plan indicates kind of the top of slope of that landfill that then quickly tapers down, slopes down to the waterfront. And this becomes relevant as we think about sea level rise and what amenities are outside of the projected sea level rise elevations. Again, I want to note the bathrooms Harbor Masters building in the context of all of this. Here we see a diagram section of the existing conditions, and you can see 100-year storm surge, which is pretty much what we just experienced in the last few weeks. It did overtop the parking lot that you can see. It comes up through the drains also. Pretty dramatic image in the middle of the dock entrances in the recent storms. So what we see in the section is that we're right at the level of extreme storm events. King tide comes up to just below the existing promenade without any wave action, and that the landscape behind the esplanade is actually down below mean high water. It's down around elevation 6. So this sets up a series of conditions to consider relative to the long term. We use projections provided by the Bay Area Development Conservation Commission, BCDC. They describe sea level rise in 2050, at 2070, and 2100. We're looking at 2 feet of sea level rise by 2050 from what we have now, about 3.5 feet, 2070, and more than 6 feet at 2100. Another jurisdictional point of consideration is the one shoreline group that are working in San Mateo County, and they have established a safe zone for the 100-year projections at elevation 17. Now remember, the esplanade is at elevation 9, and I pointed out earlier that the top of the landfill, fortunately, is around elevation 17. So this bodes well just in terms of sea level rise when you don't think about all of the other implications of water intrusion in the landfill and so on and so forth. What it does bring to light is how the marina will be treated in the future. Will the docks be raised? Will the seawalls be elevated to meet these conditions? Considering the marina is outside of the scope of this project relative to the facilities outboard of the riprap edge, although we are keeping them in mind in the schemes. So again, we see just by 2050, it's potentially underwater along the esplanade at a king tide event. These are quarterly events. Around the north and the south, there may be more wave action, certainly to the north, that would have it underwater more consistently. Water, as I mentioned, currently comes back through some of the storm drains, not all of them that have caps put on them. And there's already emergent pickleweed and saltgrass in the area between the toe of slope of the landfill and the existing esplanade. So now we'll dive into the design frameworks and elements. There are a series of principles. These are established as guide rails to the work. They are forever open to scrutiny by everyone in the city to make them more and more pointed. These are quite broad in many respects, but we also feel that they come to represent what we heard through the community engagement and conversations that we had during the discovery phase. Sierra Point will be welcoming and inclusive, more specifically, a place that's authentic to Brisbane. We're very aware of Brisbane pride, for lack of a better word. Sierra Point will have a unique identity. This is tied to the authenticity that's tied to Brisbane. And we know that art is important to the community and that this place shall inspire pride, community pride. Sierra Point will be a beautiful, durable place to enjoy year-round. Notably, especially with the next two, Sierra Point will include varied amenities for daily use in a natural setting. And we'll talk more about this, but it's the natural setting that is the dominant aspect of the identity of the environment that we've heard. Sierra Point will be a healthy, safe space. Ultimately, it's a place where you can meet your neighbors. So again, we want to keep the marina intact and then provide a place for Brisbane residents to come down, be drawn down from city center, from the center of town. to recreate, real meeting ground for everyone in town. Sierra Point will demonstrate best practices for sustainable, resilient waterfront open space. This is almost a requirement based on working within the jurisdictional boundaries of the BCDC agency who oversee shoreline development. And they have a mandate to have all projects address sea level rise based on their projections that I described before. As well as a day in the park and numerous points of connection and conversations, we also ran an online survey, 113 unique responses. There were 90 write-in responses beyond just pressing yes, no buttons. Within the 90 write-in responses, there were 201 distinct items that people mentioned. Now, a lot of them are very much about just improving the existing conditions at the site. So there's obviously a great desire to keep many of the attributes of Sierra Point as it is intact, but make them better. So more paths, more better exercise equipment, improved restroom facilities. But you can see here, launch facilities and kayak, and interestingly, food restaurants came up quite a bit. The size of these words are a reflection of the number of times they were mentioned. This is played out in the graph version of these online survey results. Small craft launch rising to the top with over 30 distinct shout outs. And this comes in line with the studies that the city conducted relative to the viability of launches on the south shore of Sierra Point. You can see the variety of other elements, but in many respects, there's little that is incompatible with Sierra Point as it is. So again, we're seeing people appreciating what is there now and looking just to make it more pleasant and to afford more opportunities for other people. We see that the majority of visitors in terms of the respondents are going once a week to once a month. We see that the exercise running and walking and biking on the graph on the right are the dominant elements or aspects, dominant reasons people go. So certainly this is not anything that would be lessened as an opportunity, right? So again, with all of these results, we're looking to enhance each one, from the dog walking, the social aspect, the boating and marina. We're looking just to improve the facilities, and access to nature being the second reason to visit. We understand these to be really access to the bay in its current conditions and the views. These two prompts from the survey were interesting in terms of they were kind of counter, but the graph on the right clearly shows this desire for the place to be for and of Brisbane. That is, it's very important that it's a hidden gem for Brisbane residents. That it should be a regional destination. People kind of equivocated. There's a whole majority that were neutral on this idea, and this is something that we can flesh out as we talk more. My personal feeling is that if you make it something that's specific and unique to Brisbane, it will inevitably invite other people to visit because it will be distinctive and interesting. Again, these two simple questions, the results of which are really telling. Sierra Point should be quiet and peaceful. There's not a motocross field. There's not a there's not a Ferris wheel. And then lively and vibrant, again, there's a group that's neutral on this, and I think that what lively and vibrant means can be discussed. Is it lively and vibrant in that it has basketball courts and a skate park, or is it lively and vibrant because on weekends it can accommodate town Brisbane events and celebrations? And so I think that there's a conversation about what lively and vibrant means to the city of Brisbane. The arts destination, in the survey responses, came back equally neutral to not particularly important. However, we know that in some conversations that we've had, it is incredibly important layer to the open space experience and its potential. And then finally, the last two elements here, should it offer natural environment and ecology? You can see that the responses are, of course, absolutely. It's a primary point and purpose that's starting to seem. And Sierra Point should offer access to the bay for recreation. This reinforces the point and purpose of the marina, but it also reinforces the idea of other program aspects and physical infrastructure, such as small craft launch. So all of this is to say that we're hearing, I think, a similar voice across the board, that the marina will be maintained, the access to the broad views across the site, the bay, back to San Bruno Mountain, across to Mount Diablo downtown, all of this is to be captured and heightened and improved upon. The call outs here capture a variety of comments from our other interactions and meetings, like the day at the park and so forth, and conversation points. The yellow are specifically about art. The green are about a program amenities, and the purple are about resiliency. But they're all in line with what we see from the survey too. And little is contradictory to the main ambitions and goals that we've heard from the city at large. So as we think about all of these elements, we're also thinking about the structure of the open space and the site. To have any open space, we have to reduce the amount of parking. There's about 11 acres of parking out on the site. We want to prioritize flexible open uses and spaces that meet multiple needs rather than having very fixed, very specific uses that limit the number of people. We do not want the park to propose or have or include amenities and facilities that you can find elsewhere, either on Sierra Point in the privately owned public space or back in town. Obviously, designing for sea level rise, as I showed in those diagrams, is of primary importance. We understand that there are many aspects of access to Sierra Point that need to be addressed. That's beyond the scope of this project, but we do know that access from downtown is key to the success of Sierra Point as a public open space for everyone. We're designing up at about 60,000 feet. So it's broad gestures to establish character and quality, the kind of experience people hope to see, organizing the layout of the open space and the infrastructure broadly. Designing the master plan will be designed to continue the operation of the marina without changing its design. So the marina is valued and preserved. And certainly the critical facilities and circulation access will be maintained. And the ambition is with great efficiency. We have to design within the constraints of the landfill. There are weight limits on it and the cap and what that poses to the design. BCDC I mentioned relative to sea level rise, and then treating stormwater is something that's integrated on site within rain gardens and planted facilities. So with all that in mind, I'm going to show you three schemes, but they have a basic organization that these diagrams describe. There are existing facilities at the southern end, the right-hand side of the plan. These are the yacht club, the harbor master's building, the courtyard, and the shed. And also we're aware of, obviously, the bathrooms down there, trash enclosures. There is a perimeter condition that, so that describes a functional zone. And then north of that so-called functional zone, we can imagine this is the area where we can start to modify that landscape, introduce planting, introduce new program. Surrounding all of it in anticipation of sea level rise is a perimeter condition where we can start to accommodate and allow for water to ultimately inundate this area. And we're talking 30, 60, 100 years. And then finally, Parking, obviously, is a major point of the conversation. The only attention to it at this time has been to suggest we can start to minimize it and right size it. It's not to say we're not providing enough parking for the marina functions. We still have to figure out what those numbers are, especially in relation to the amount of parking that's offered off-site. If we think about weekend events where there's no one in the office buildings, there's an enormous parking garage adjacent to the open space, and there's a large parking lot. This diagram that I just showed you is reinforced with planting strategies. So we, like I said, would build upon the emergent wetland that's happening at the toe of the slope where water is already coming in, and we would start to create a native wetland environment along the toe of the slope and the edge of Sierra Point within this property. We would then transition to upland planting that's natives, and then there would be planting specifically for stormwater treatment that would pick up our paved surfaces and the parking areas. Circulation is pretty straightforward in that we would maintain a BCDC compliant bay trail. I think the trail right now is about 9 feet wide. We would expand it to anywhere up to 18 feet wide. And this allows for biking and jogging and walking. It allows for fire truck access to the docks and service trucks and vehicles. And then the parking areas would be served on the public lands from a loop road, essentially, that plugs back into the circulation of Sierra Point. Okay. So now I'm going to walk through 3 schemes, and as I mentioned, they each have common elements to them. What I want to note while we have these 3 up is that they're really distinguished by how they're treated at the north end, how they're treated at the southern end, and how they're treated in the middle, although these are more similar than how different they are between schemes at each of the ends. Being on site, you become really aware that the corners of Sierra Point become the most significant places and the most amazing of places when you're out there and you get those broad views across the bay. Common to each scheme, we have native wetland, upland planting that I described in the framework. We have a bay trail that's redefined with access to the marina, small craft launch, multi-use lawns. I talked before about the value of having things that are multi-purpose, so you get more bang for your buck. Similarly with parking, if we can think of these as plazas as well as parking lots when there's time and space. Topographic features that create unique environments and block wind and frame views. Obviously, we're taking advantage of the incredible views across the bay with specific overlook moments and art installations that could be a part of reinforcing or enhancing this experience. And our ultimate goal to make a social environment. So within all the schemes, although there aren't specific points drawn, there is an abundance of seating areas and picnic areas, group places, as well as places for individuals. Those aren't drawn on the plans, but they would ultimately be included and have been accounted for in the drawings. So I've talked a lot about the wetland edge. This is China Camp just up north, but you can start to imagine at the water's edge a wetland condition that meets hills that rise up into coastal scrub, grasslands, oak planting. All plants would be native, could even be endemic. There are species that are really unique to San Bruno that could come down and be part of the upland planting. The bay edge, right now it's that hard concrete path. It could actually be naturalized, pulled back from the very edge, the bay trail, pulled back from the very edge of Sierra Point to create a little more room and play and a sense of immersion for people running, biking, jogging along that path. As I mentioned before, you saw the diagrams. In anticipation of sea level rise, if we can raise, or we're proposing in the master plan to raise the bay trail up to elevation 13, this gives it long-term protection against sea level rise. And we can do this by pushing it back against the existing slope of the landfill and then keeping clear the space below for this emergent ecology and wetland ecology. Conceptually, and we won't get into phasing yet, but it's part of our phase 3, the existing Esplanade Promenade could be kept in place until it no longer functioned because of sea level rise. There are many examples of marinas that you actually pass through these coastal conditions. This one specifically is, I think, South Carolina, where you walk through a coastal wetland to access your boat. We've heard from many that small craft launch and facilities are desired. There's a report, as I mentioned, by the city that describes its viability on the southern edge. So each scheme includes one of these launch facilities on the southern edge. We've also heard from many people about the opportunity for adding program for the boating communities. And this is something that is outside of the scope of this work, but we would want to include aspects of the design that could help fulfill new programs for water access. Multi-purpose lawns, again, we talked about the value of just having flexible open space out there for various events that the city can run, and also just useful on a daily basis for people to throw a ball around. Talked about flexible parking lots. It's an example on the waterfront, 3 of these slides at Fort Mason Center in San Francisco, where they take out their parked cars and create a off-the-grid pop-up. Talked about the value of topographical features and earthworks to block wind, frame views, and create an environment that's unique and specific to the site. And then art can be large of scale. It can enhance the site, can add to its identity as something specific and unique. The piece in the top left actually responds to wind conditions and frames of room. The piece on the upper right was just installed in Alameda and becomes a landmark that you can see from quite far away at the center of their park. We know that the city of Brisbane is beginning an arts master plan, and would imagine that consideration of Sierra Point art is included within that master plan development. And then finally, all of this is about connecting people to each other and nature. And so within all of these elements, as I mentioned, there are places for socializing, connecting to one another. Okay, this is the last section, and we'll go through each of these schemes. Scheme 1, there are elements again that I'll mention here, but are consistent with other ones. There's special attention paid to the north end. This is where they're distinct. Special attention paid to the south end. And there's a planting of trees along the perimeter to block wind and be a threshold into the park experience. We have in each scheme considered the location for conversation with everyone of the yacht club, of the Harbor Masters building, of bathrooms. Although I will say that in every scenario, there is the potential to put marina-specific bathrooms on the water floating with the docks. Here we see a view looking down. This is with the trees in place. You can see in terms of them blocking wind, framing the parking lots, providing shade for parked cars. Again, the actual footprint of the parking areas is to be determined. Oh. Multi-use parking lot is highlighted, but this is where the yacht club parking would be, marina parking. You can see the play features in this axon of what's called Play Mountain, the namesake of this scheme, and specifically you can see the marina terraces and boat launch on the southern end. You can see the transitional wetland to upland planting. This is all without trees. That frames the edge condition, and the bay trail highlighted in yellow. In every scheme, the fishing pier is maintained. In terms of how this piece is organized, it's what I just described. So we have a bookend, this overlook. Every scheme has an overlook that looks out over the bay. You can see Mount Diablo, you can see San Francisco. Here we have our landscape feature anchoring one end. We have a core central arrival point in the middle, and we have our southern bookend. Here it's the water access and launch that we're calling marine terraces. And here you see those elements. So there is a distinct, unique lookout anchoring this moment. It could be elevated, you arrive and climb up, but it's also part of what we're calling Play Mountain as a more playful sculptural environment, potentially for all ages, framing views, blocking wind, but a place to run around. Multi-purpose fields are in the middle of the open space. The yacht club has been moved in this scenario. The idea is that it could anchor with its own activity and vibrancy some of the central area, and it could benefit from and contribute to more energy if the retail spaces at the bottom of the garage come online. So this becomes a more social area with food and beverage generally. We did hear what prompted the moving the yacht club was one of our community days when we talked to some people who said that they were members of the yacht club and talked about its potential refurbishment and improvement. The Harbor Masters building is moved up along with the courtyard out of sea level rise conditions, and then public bathrooms are arrayed along the back with the new yacht club and a small craft rental facility at the end. So we'll look really quickly at images that evoke what we imagine these could be. Play Mountain, I don't think there's anything like it in the Bay Area or on the West Coast, an environment that is not explicitly a playground, but can have elements of play incorporated into it, that it's a place people can meander and wander around. You can sit and look at the views, but it also can be a compelling place to bring kids. Overall, a fun and delightful environment for exploration. Defined by earthwork, again, acknowledging that there will be weight limits on the landfill, but within that, we think that we can start to see some topography. At the southern end, anchored by what we're calling the marine terrace. Again, there's no other feature like this in the Bay Area we could imagine. So it would be specifically imagine a kind of a constructed area for tide pools, watching the water come in and out. It could even be an outdoor classroom. And this is where we imagine there could be a small craft launch, specifically as you see in the images on the bottom, which is in Brooklyn Bridge Park in New York City at the mouth of the harbor. This image of an environment that's playful. At the northern end, that you could climb up this hillock and look out across the bay, look back to San Bruno. And then the marine terraces that can register the tide and also have a wetland component and allow for water access that's safe. Scheme 2, Gardens of the Bay. Similarly, as I said, the north end is anchored by one feature, the south end by another. In the middle here, we have more of an arrival plaza framed by earthwork, and then another open lawn with an amphitheater component looking out over the bay. The Harbor Masters building stays where it is for as long as it possibly can. It's possible to even lose the ground floor and move all of their offices up to the mezzanine as sea level rises. The yacht club stays where it is. I should note that game amenities are added in every scheme, and here you see the horseshoes and bocce ball expanded for the yacht club. Other rental facilities, bathrooms, and so forth are across the park. We also see in this plan these red elements, and these are large-scale artworks that can be occupied, providing shade. They're interactive to some degree. Here's a view looking down with the trees. You can see these gardens that are on elevated earthworks that are tipped to the views across the bay or back to San Bruno Mountain. And on the south end, there is an artificial beach, of which there are many examples in the US now, most notably recently Crane Cove Park in San Francisco, which has been a huge success. Looking at the building blocks, again, we have this landscape feature, an immersive garden built on sloping earthworks that look out over different views. We have an amphitheater component, our central arrival point that's multi-purpose with plaza and lawn, and then water access in the form of a beach and dock that takes you out onto the water with seawall breakwater. Here you see all these elements again illustrated. Note the beach experience is expanded. There's a muscle beach fitness area. People ask for more fitness equipment. There are beach volleyball courts that are part of this beach experience. You can see here the floating dock that would take kayakers and out onto the water, and maybe small boats could come up for sailing classes. Bathrooms are across the site, but they're back by the parking. And again, the harbor master's space stays where it is now. One thing to note as a distinction between this scheme and others, you can see each of the existing docks plugging into the bay trail on this plan. That would mean that if you're parked upland, you actually have to navigate, move around, walk around to get to those. And we'll see in the prior scheme and in the next one, these are actually much more efficient. But what a wonderful walk it would be, right? Getting to your place. So here you see the garden experience. Again, these elliptical gardens are elevated and sloping out to point to views across the bay. They are places that you can meander through, that you can picnic within, that you can hang out in their blocking wind and creating a kind of magnificent bowl. Art in this scenario is more significant than the others to the extent that it becomes an integral part of the plan, that they become landmarks along the way, and they are of scale. They're big places that you can inhabit or really encounter. There is an existing so-called amphitheater on the site, but it's facing Oyster Point and it's kind of set back from the Bay Trail. This amphitheater could be as formal or as informal as people wanted. We've generally heard more informal the better, less formality, less structure. But here you're actually looking across the bay towards San Bruno Mountain, aligned with the boat slips. The image in the middle is Crane Cove Beach. The image on the lower right is Crane Cove. The image on the top right is Sugar Beach, I believe, in Toronto. And so they're all fabricated, constructed beaches. Crane Cove is notable because while it doesn't get the same wind that you do here, still it's subject to the Bay Area weather, fog and wind, and yet it's a huge success and amenity. So here we see an image that suggests how these sort of raised gardens might be, where you get to look out over everything and everyone and across the bay. Back up to San Bruno. Here's a suggestion of what that constructed beach might be at the south end. Okay, Brisbane Ramble, Scheme 3. Here, I want to point out, well, I remember the points of access to the docks that are straight and efficient. Consider now that there is one point of access that is the ramped bridge that takes you down to the Esplanade. There is a vehicular point of access at the northern end too. So each dock essentially gets its own walkway for access. North end is anchored by an overlook, another raised element with long views, but there's an informal amphitheater seated on that promontory on the end. The north end's characterized by this immersive planting path experience within which are many lawns or picnic areas. The planting can set up views back out to specific points across the bay or even mark the solstice. They're various size spaces that people can have picnics in, celebration birthdays. We see again, bathrooms are along the back edge and laundry. Their yacht club is moved in this scenario. Again, this idea that is anchoring a more vibrant space. We did learn recently that the yacht club in Richmond is coupled with a restaurant below. So there's this, again, this idea of synergy in terms of liveliness and activity. This scheme at the south end is anchored by a wetland park, of which there are many examples, but this could be designed to be, again, another kind of ecological classroom and a place of exploration. And we have a boat launch that comes out that's unprotected, but is consistent with the proposal that was done by the city study. The central area is marked by multi-purpose lawn, by multi-use plaza, again, to accommodate larger events. And then other lawn spaces that could ultimately be taken over potentially by, not formally, or it could be formal, but not formally, is the idea that maybe one becomes special to the marina residents. And that's where they go to socialize and hang out. And yet there's still more space for others. Again, want to note the opportunity for improved games and so forth that the yacht club already has. Our Axon view, again, you can see the ramble, landscape experience, the overlook at the promontory in the southern end, anchored by the wetland park. And here you see those building blocks again, these discrete and significant landscape features that anchor one end of the site, the overlook, a pin in that corner, and the water access and launch wetland park at the other, with our core entry experience that's multi-purpose in the middle. So reminding you of just the consistent elements. We have the bay trail that's pretty much the same in every scheme. Sometimes we're showing bridges. It's to be determined, refined, developed over no doubt many years in terms of the plan moving forward. We have a unique feature at the southern end and a unique feature at the northern end. These are really the elements for getting feedback on. And then there are some technical aspects of the plan to work through relative to the parking counts and some other infrastructural considerations. Looking at the overlook, the entry plaza and the wetland park, you can imagine a vegetated ramble that you can wander through, sit in, picnic within. Again, you can see the lawns that might be associated with special discrete areas. So while you can wander through as a family, you could pick one of these up for an event or just hang out. The amphitheater on the end of the overlook, we're imagining something less formal or familiar as an amphitheater, but something much more playful, and possibly a large lawn that could just slope down and look out over the bay. In the middle, as I mentioned, really leveraging flexibility and multi-purpose aspects of a plaza and lawn area for large city events and celebration. And then the wetland park on the southern end, it's an ecological park essentially that could be unique to this environment and frankly unique to the bay as something constructed from scratch. This image is looking back at San Bruno Mountain, this idea of a lawn, an overlook, pinning the north end of the open space. Everything's a little exaggerated, but it's to evoke the kind of experience and moment that could really anchor one end of the park. Here we are looking southwest over what could be this wetland park. So thank you for your patience. This takes us through our thinking and background and framing for these different schemes. They are to elicit conversation about character and identity experience. All the while we are keeping in mind and designing for sea level rise as it's projected through 2100. And the marina facilities and the essential aspects of the site are to be maintained and enhanced. This is both views across the bay, access to the water, as well as the function and operations of the marina facilities and the yacht club. And with that, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you for your time.